Let's get started with the first one. The first one is pretty simple. I start with a log. It's water oak found here locally in Florida. And I just start by getting the two ends trued up, clear off any cracked grain, anything, any check marks, just so I got a good surface to start with. Take it over to the bandsaw, cut it down to basic size, and then we'll get it over to the lathe. Once we get it over to the lathe, I'll take it, put it between centers, and just set up a tenon on the end so we can put it in the chuck. Here I'm using the Easy Wood Tools chuck. I left this footage in here. If you've never used one, they are so convenient. I know they're a little bit pricey, but honestly, all chucks cost a little bit. I do love it. I do use other chucks. I like my one-way chucks very much, but this chuck is really nice to have. I bought mine used, so I didn't pay full price for it, full disclosure, but it is definitely worth the money. Really quick, really efficient, holds well. Just wanted to give a little bit on that. Okay, once we've got the piece in the chuck, I do a little bit of measuring. I'm going to use a Forstner bit to hog out most of the material here for the candle holder. So I just size it up and then start taking out the inside. Here you see a picture of what we have left after we use the Forstner bit. So you see we got a little bit down there that we at least want to clean up. We can leave that little indentation down there, not a big deal, because you won't see it once the votive is in there. But you at least want to clean up the bottom so it doesn't look as sloppy. All right, once we confirm that our votive is sized well, we just want to part it off. I'll start by using a parting tool, and then I'll end with a flush trim saw, and then we're good to go on to project number 2. For project number 2, we're going to rock a thin-stemmed votive candle holder. And again, we start between centers using the water oak. Pretty much start the same as last time, make a tenon, and then we're going to go into the chuck before we further fine-tune the piece. All right, once we're in the chuck, we start to work on the top side of our piece, getting the part that will actually hold the votive set up before we go down any further. Just like in any spindle work, especially when you're going to get really thin, you want to make sure you work top to bottom, or I guess right to left, you would say, to make sure you finish those parts of the piece before you get down and continue to thin it out. Otherwise, you have much more of a chance of it cracking on you. Here you see me marking rough placement for where our T-light is actually going to be. This time, instead of using the Forstner bit, we're going to go in with our Easy Wood Tools Easy Rougher and slowly shape out the piece with that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how this piece took shape. I was originally going to go in with a basic recess just to hold the T-light, but as I got into the piece, I found a piece that had a hole in it. You know, it must be like a bug track or something like that. And where it was sitting on the inside of the recess, I just didn't like it. So what I did is I decided to give this piece a little more shape, and I'm really glad that I did. So I created a little more of a wave pattern in there. Kind of looks a little bit more like a flower, and I really enjoy that shape much more. Once we have the top part of our candle holder shaped, I do a little bit of sanding, like I said, working top to bottom or right to left, making sure that's all set up before we move down to the next section. You'll see we'll basically work in 3 different sections once we start working on the side of it as well. Basically the top part, or the top third, the middle, and then we'll work on to the bottom, sanding in between each step before we get down to that next level. here's another step in the design process. I was originally going to try to keep the natural edge on the sides of the candle holder, but I had lost some of it while turning. So I made a decision to pull the rest of the bark off, and again, honestly, I'm really glad I did. I really enjoy the shape that this has without the bark on it as well. All right, after we have everything shaped up and sanded, we're ready to go. We're once again going to part it off, and we'll move on to project number 3. All right, on to project number 3. With each project, I tried to up the ante a little bit, making each project a little more interesting, a little more difficult, adding a few more elements into it. Again, here we're going to use some water oak, starting between centers. This time we're going to do a little bit of an offset tea light candle holder. There's many ways to do this. You'll see in this one, I just do it by moving the piece in the chuck just a little bit, just a few degrees, and that'll add well more than enough, and you'll see that as we turn. Once we've got the piece in the chuck, I'm going to work on the top again, same as we did for our last one. I'm going to make sure we have everything sized up. I'm going to use a Forstner bit again, as we did in our first project, just to get things started, and then I'll move back onto the turning tools. In my tailstock, you'll see that I have a product from Rubber Chucky. I love their products. They leave no marks on the surface. You can use regular cone centers, and I use those as well, but I can't say enough about the Rubber Chucky product line. It's just a great product, a great company to deal with, and I really enjoy everything that they have that I've checked out so far. I'll make sure I leave a link down below so you guys can check them out if you'd like as well. Okay, up to this point, I've shaped everything through the top of our candle holder. I'm going to make sure I get that all sanded up before I move on, because the next step will be adjusting the axis a little bit in order to start turning off center. All right, here's our first setup for our off-center turning. You'll see I loosen the piece up in the chuck and just adjust it very minimally. You don't need much, because keep in mind, you're working off of two sides, of course. So the little bit will turn into much more than you originally anticipated. Just make a slight adjustment and then start turning. You'll see that it'll bode very well. After we have that section sanded up, it's on to the off-center position number 2. Now I keep moving things in the same direction instead of loosening it and turning it back in the previous direction. You could use either way. This time I just decided to stick with the same direction. You should experiment and you can kind of see the differences you'll get by doing both. Once I have that lower section sanded up, it's time to take things and move them back into the chuck in the original orientation. So basically flat on the jaws. I do this so that I can work on the bottom and then eventually part the piece off. All right, I haven't spoken about finish much in this video. In the first candle holder, I left it completely unfinished. I like the natural look of the bark around the sides. You could honestly spray it or use some walnut oil or whatever you want, but I chose to leave it natural. On the second candle holder, I did use a Mahoney's walnut oil finish, which is what I'm using here. Just a nice natural looking finish, nothing too over the top. Leaves a nice soft surface to it, and you could add anything on top of it if you wished.